Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Every weekday, we bring you the latest from newsmakers, analysts, and our correspondents from around the world. And today on the show, we're talking about Stephen Colbert's battle with CBS and the FCC. Up first, though, we have our top story. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg took to the stand in a Los Angeles courtroom today, testifying in this landmark trial over whether Meta and other social media platforms intentionally designed their products to be addictive for children. The plaintiff is a 20-year-old woman identified in court as KGM, claiming that using social media as a child and teenager exacerbated her depression and suicidal thoughts. The defendants, Meta and Google, dispute those claims, and they point to a number of safety measures that they have integrated on their platforms to protect young users. It is a high-stakes trial, to say the least. The outcome could have implications for thousands of similar cases. So for that, I want to bring in NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. Hi, Laura.
I'm so excited to talk to you about this. There is so much happening in this trial.
For those that have not been following this as closely as both you and I have, lay out for us the argument on both sides here and also how it came to be that Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg took to the stand.
The way he entered the courthouse in Los Angeles today, I think, speaks volumes about what he's facing in this trial and what's at stake. As he's going into court, he's surrounded by a crush of cameras and a group of parents who have either lost their children to suicide, or the children engaged in some serious amount of self-harm, were standing linked hand in hand, waiting to face him. Oh, wow. And this is not a scene that he's entirely unfamiliar with. When he testified in front of Congress 2 years ago, the same group of parents were there with pictures of their children to face him. But today is the first time he's had to take the stand in a court of law to answer about his design choices.
Right. Not congressional testimony.
Not congressional testimony. He's testified in court before about antitrust, but this is about the core. This is the heartland of what he has been accused of doing for years by critics who have said, you knowingly designed these platforms to be addictive for children's brains who cannot handle them.
And what is the defense saying?
The defense is saying, we understand that some kids might be more susceptible to habits that might be problematic, but these things are not addictive. This is not like cigarettes. And we put a whole bunch of safeguards in place so that parents can be more aware of the harms, so that you can get nudges when you've been on too long or it's time to log off at night. So their basic defense is, we are not the cause of what Kaylee suffered here, and we certainly shouldn't be to blame for all the many, many others that are coming behind her.
Building on that, the head of Instagram, obviously owned by Meta, Adam Mosseri, was on the stand last week, right? And he said, listen, kids can have unhealthy habits, for instance, on Instagram, but there is a difference between having an unhealthy habit, right, or using this in an unhealthy way, and clinical addiction.
And it's a maybe probably the biggest sort of hurdle, obstacle, challenge that the plaintiffs have here is by trying to make that link. Because to get legal liability, they have to prove that Instagram was a substantial factor in this particular plaintiff's mental health struggles. And so that means, like, if she was depressed for any other reason, like the family struggles that the defense has tried to point to, like, that's going to be a real problem for her to try to make that tight causal link between using Instagram. Basically, but for Instagram, I wouldn't have been depressed. That's a hard argument.
So the defense is going after the plaintiff's story personally as well.
Yes.
Amidst all of this, how is Zuckerberg's testimony, how is that building on what Adam Mosseri has already put out there in this kind of difference between an unhealthy habit and a clinical addiction?
These guys are going into court knowing they're unliked. They're rich, they're unpopular, and parents are angry. That is a dangerous recipe for them. And so they know they have to try to get on that stand and convince a jury, we understand the concern. Like, they have to try to be empathetic. And already you see...
humanizing him.
They're trying, and you already see the plaintiff's attorney like confronting Zuckerberg with all these internal memos about how he should try to make himself more likable. And he says, yeah, I know this is not my strong suit, but he's got like internal memos about like, just be natural, don't be robotic, like knowing the jury is paying attention to his like every eyebrow movement. And maybe his testimony doesn't make or break the case. But in a case where you sort of do need the jurors to think that there are humans behind these companies, they needed someone to try to humanize what has been cast as like a social ill of our time, our generation's problem, right? For many people is social media.
I gotta think that they feel as if they can win this because they didn't settle, right? Snap and TikTok both settled ahead of the trial.
Yes.
But Meta said, no, we're going all the way. Why is that?
A couple things could be happening. One could be that they think they can win this for the reasons I stated, that like the plaintiff has such a high burden to convince this jury that Instagram was the substantial factor in her depression. So maybe they think legally, if the jury actually pays attention to the jury instructions, they can win this. They also know they have more than 1,500 people just like this plaintiff waiting in the wings, right? Yeah. And so if they settle this
looking at this and saying,
they may think like we have to do this or we are going to be paying out billions of dollars. Now they may be paying out billions of dollars if they lose this trial too, right? But I think they had to take the gamble that they can win the legal argument to avoid all this liability.
So then let's talk about that, the implications of the decision of this case, right? And what that could mean for, as you mentioned, all of these other cases. I just interviewed the AG of New Mexico who has mounted a case against Meta as well about sexual exploitation of children, right? How could this reverberate on those other cases, whichever way this is decided?
I think every plaintiff's attorney in the country is watching this because of how pervasive social media is in our lives. The idea that these platforms, which everyone is so consumed by, could be on the hook not just for allowing like a sexual predator to be on the app, but for their design choices, right? In New Mexico, it's the idea that they're not doing enough to guard against people who are preying on teens, and you can understand the interests of the state there. But the idea that you could be on the hook from a civil liability context just for your design choices could apply to every social media and tech company that you can possibly think of. And these are the same companies that have enjoyed being shielded from virtually any liability for as long as the internet has been around, right? Congress said we are not going to find these companies liable for the content that happens on these apps, just the way you wouldn't find AT&T or Verizon liable if someone makes a bomb threat on a phone line, right? That has been the general rule for basically our entire life of the internet. If this case finds that there is liability from a civil standpoint, I think that blows like a huge hole through federal law in that shield way that I just talked about as we know it.
Laura Jarrett, thank you.
Love talking to you about this.
By the way, we should note that TikTok and Snap denied wrongdoing in their settlement of the California case. We should also note that in the New Mexico case, Meta denies the civil charges and accuses the Attorney General of cherry-picking documents and making, quote, sensationalist arguments. It also says it's introduced built-in protections for young people on their platforms, along with settings and tools for parents. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is now weighing in on the CBS clash with late-night host Stephen Colbert. On Monday, Colbert said CBS lawyers urged him not to air an interview with Texas Senate candidate Representative James Tallarico over concerns about the FCC's equal time rule. The move by CBS was triggered by statements from Chairman Carr, who said recently that the agency plans to enforce equal time regulation even for day and late-night talk shows. So television newscasts and news interviews, known as bona fide news, they were exempt from giving equal time to political candidates. You have to report whatever the news is, regardless of the party. There was, though, a precedent that late-night shows also fell under the bona fide news exemption. But the FCC is now saying no more. For more on this, I want to bring in NBC News business reporter Allie Canal. Hey, Allie.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Let's talk first about what is happening here, right? The back and forth really between both Stephen Colbert and CBS. How do we get here?
Yeah, I mean, this all started because Stephen Colbert, he taped an interview with Texas Representative James Tallarico. He's running for Senate in that primary. CBS ultimately chose not to air this interview on broadcast. Now, Colbert came out. He talked about this in front of his audience. This aired on primetime and said that the decision stemmed from pressure on the part of CBS from the FCC to abide by their equal time rule. And this is something that we've been kind of hearing a lot more about, this provision that's really been at the FCC for a long time. And CBS says it didn't prohibit this segment, it just gave other types of options. Colbert kind of came back and said he didn't agree with that. Of course, you have to keep in mind that his show is ending in May. But then we heard from FCC Chairman Brendan Carr today. He gave a press conference. He said that there was no censorship. He sort of reiterated the fact that the network had other options. So it really started as this late night TV moment and now has led to further questions about the regulatory environment within media and really free speech as a whole.
By the way, Colbert did, in fact, air the interview on YouTube.
Yep,
and it got a lot of views.
Millions and millions of views, well over 5 million views at this point. And now, of course, a big part of that is this general interest in this incident. But so many views on YouTube. And then Tallarico's campaign actually garnered $2.5 million within 24 hours after this was aired. So this is creating a lot of buzz.
Ali, talk about the FCC's equal time rule, what it means, and who it applies to.
Yeah, so this is a long-standing FCC regulation rule, and it basically says that if one legally qualified candidate is going to go on a broadcast television network or on a radio show of some kind, their opposing candidate is obligated to receive that equal airtime. Now, the key word here is broadcast. This does not apply to cable. This does not apply to digital. It does not apply to streaming platforms. This is part of the reason why the Tallarico interview ended up on YouTube, because, again, no issues there when it came to this equal time rule. However, the FCC did publish updated guidance in January that said these late night talk shows, these daytime shows, that they have never been not exempt from this rule. So there's something called bona fide news. And way back when, it was sort of a precedent that was established that these talk shows were considered bona fide news, that they could be exempt from these types of regulations. However,
so they were in the news realm, but not formally so.
Exactly. And that was the argument there from some of those late night shows. Right. But then the FCC in this January guidance said, well, no, that's never been the case. And if they want to be considered bona fide news, they need to petition themselves to be that. So that is the big change here.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a little bit of a digestion period for these shows to really understand the implications of these equal time rules.
He also at one point said, well, I get it that Colbert is probably upset because he's leaving late night television.
He said, look,
and he thinks he's had a long storied career.
Yes, his show's ending. I get it. But that doesn't change the rules of the game here, is what he said. So a little not so subtle dig at Colbert.
Was Carr kind of alluding to the fact that he feels as if now that these talk shows have dipped their toes into the political conversational realm, that they are no longer exempt to this rule of equal time, whereas maybe 20, 30 years ago they were talking less about politics and more focusing on just the entertainment of it all?
That's exactly what it is. And during his press conference, he said the fake news media. He said it's a hoax.
Wow.
He really echoed words and phrases that we've heard from President Trump. He said, well, if the equal time rules were applied, then CBS would have to interview the other Democratic candidates, and that would have more exposure to those Democrats, and they could say whatever they wanted to. So he was trying to say that you could, if you took these rules at their core, that you could hear from more Democrats, and that in and of itself is not partisan. But you're right. When you hear the president talk about the fake news media, he goes after these late night shows, these daytime talk shows all the time. It does lean itself and wade into that question mark about whether or not this is an infringement on free speech.
And why has Tallarico become a hot button person for some of these shows.
Yeah, well, like you said, he's running in that Texas Democratic Senate primary. The primaries are where equal time is incredibly important. Like you said, the midterms coming up as well. There's also the fact that Tallarico appeared on ABC's The View not that long ago, and the FCC actually opened up a probe into that interview, basically implying that The View didn't abide by the equal time code. This is sort of enforcing an existing rule, and one that sort of he doubled down on in January when he made that distinction that these shows were not automatically in the clear.
So, Ali, Paramount Global, the parent company CBS, they've had this interesting relationship with the Trump administration. Last July, CBS agreed to pay a $16 million settlement to get out of a lawsuit brought by President Trump over a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris. CBS announced last year that Stephen Colbert's show would come to an end in 2026. At the same time, Paramount was in the middle of seeking the Trump administration's approval for this $8 billion merger with Hollywood studio Skydance. As part of that deal, then, David Ellison, the son of Trump supporter Larry Ellison, took over at Paramount Skydance. And now Paramount Skydance is trying to buy Warner Brothers Discovery and would need the FTC to sign off on that as well.
Yeah, and it's crazy hearing you tick through all of those things because Paramount Skydance is really at the center of this regulatory environment. And we just heard that David Ellison met with President Trump, and we know his father, Larry Ellison, is a friend of President Trump. So they want to kind of play this regulatory dance, be within that good favor. And at the same time, we're also at this moment within media where it's really hard to turn a profit. Very competitive. The streaming world is changing right before our very eyes, and so is the news world as well. There's just a ton of consolidation here.
Ali Canal, thank you.
Thank you so much.
That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.